I'm not a city guy. I was raised around woods, dirt roads, and cold rivers. Camping never felt like a break for me. It was just part of life. But after years of working in a cramped office building, I'd gotten soft. One day, I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd fallen asleep to wind moving through pine branches. So I packed my gear and took a week off work. No plans, no map trails. Just a backpack, a tent, and a cooler in the back of my truck. I pointed the truck toward the mountains, picked a spot where the road narrowed to gravel, and drove until the cell signal died. There's a certain spot I found on a topo map the night before I left. No marked trail went to it, but I saw a cluster of lakes tucked into a small basin surrounded by a ridge. A shallow stream ran from one of them, which I figured I could follow upstream. It looked remote enough to give me that good kind of isolation. Far from people, but not so far that it was reckless. By late morning on day 2, I was hiking in. The stream was barely knee-high at its deepest, running clear over a gravel bed. I followed game trails mostly, sometimes just cutting through brush. My pack wasn't heavy, but the terrain slowed me down. Thorns ripped at my pants. Fallen branches made a mess of the path. I must have stepped over 24 logs in the first mile. I had to keep checking my compass just to stay on course. The ground rose gently the whole way, climbing into thicker forest. I saw no other signs of people. No boot prints, no wrappers, not even a fire ring. It was the kind of quiet where the only thing you hear is your own breathing and the occasional rustle of a squirrel darting through leaves. That was what I wanted. I reached the basin around 4 p.m., tired, sore, but happy. The lakes were small and glassy. There was no breeze. Only insects hovered in the still air, circling above the water. I picked a flat patch near a fallen tree that formed a sort of natural bench, with a deadfall slope behind it where wind had knocked over dozens of pines long ago. Their gray trunks crisscrossed each other like giant matchsticks, bark peeled off, bone-colored and smooth. It looked eerie, but it was the flattest spot with some shelter, and I was too worn out to go further. I set up camp. Tent, food cache hung in a tree, quick dinner of trail mix and jerky. I filtered some water and watched the sky turn orange over the trees. Mosquitoes were starting to find me, but I had repellent. It was quiet, too quiet. That kind of absolute silence you only find far away from roads. The only thing I heard was my own chewing. Then I zipped up the tent, slid into my sleeping bag, and slept hard. I woke in the middle of the night because of something I couldn't name. Not a noise, not a dream.
Justa sensa.
I laid still for a long time, eyes open in the dark, waiting. I didn't hear anything, but I felt off. I told myself it was just the usual nerves from being out in the wild alone. Sometimes the mind plays tricks when there's no city noise to drown it out. Eventually, I dozed again. Next morning was gray. The air was damp. I made coffee and oatmeal on my small stove and tried to shake the weird feeling from the night. The forest smelled heavy, like wet moss and sap. I decided I'd do some exploring and circle the lakes, maybe climb the ridge later in the day. I took only a day pack with some snacks, a knife, and my water filter. I planned to be back well before dark. The terrain was trickier than I thought. One side of the lake was almost marshy, full of thick grass and mud that sucked at my boots. I had to loop around and climb higher ground to avoid it. That took time. I ended up cutting through the far side of the deadfall slope. I didn't like walking through it. The broken trees made for slow, clumsy hiking. Every few feet I had to climb over something or duck under a branch. Some of the logs were half-rotted, soft under my boots. The whole place smelled like mildew and damp wood. That's when I saw something that stopped me cold. A ripped-up tarp, faded blue, tangled in the branches of a broken tree. It was shredded, half buried under pine needles and dirt, but it hadn't been there long enough to disappear completely. Next to it, half covered in moss, was a crushed metal can. Looked like something you'd store beans or soup in. It was rusted but modern. I saw more. What looked like a section of tent pole, snapped in half, and what might have been part of a backpack strap. It didn't make sense. No trails came out here. If someone had camped here, they must have bushwhacked just like I did. But why leave all this behind? And why was it destroyed? I crouched near the tarp and looked closer. The tears in it weren't clean. They were jagged, like something had pulled hard at it. Animal, maybe. A bear? A cougar? It wasn't impossible, but it didn't feel like a sight a bear had wrecked. There weren't claw marks or scattered trash, no obvious signs of digging. It looked like someone had packed in and something had gone very wrong very fast. I suddenly didn't want to be there. I turned around and went straight back to my camp. When I got back, nothing was disturbed. My tent was fine. My food cache still hung in the tree, but that feeling returned, like someone was watching me. It clung to me all afternoon. I sat on the dead log behind my tent, facing the trees, and tried to calm myself down. I was probably just rattled. Old gear in the woods didn't mean anything. People abandon stuff all the time. Maybe some amateur campers panicked after seeing a bear and ran off. But the more I told myself that, the less I believed it. I made a fire that night, even though I'd planned not to. I wanted the heat, the light, and something to break the silence. I sat with my back to the deadfall, watching the trees. Every crackle in the fire made me flinch. I didn't eat much. My stomach was tight. When I finally got in the tent and zipped it up, I kept my knife beside me and my boots close. That night was worse than the last. I woke up again. Same as before, no sound, no reason, just wide awake. But this time I felt certain I wasn't alone. I didn't move. I barely breathed. The tent was silent, but I had this cold, sharp awareness that something was close. I waited for a sound, footsteps, breathing, anything, but heard nothing. Still, my gut said something was out there. After a long time, I sat up and carefully unzipped the tent flap just a few inches. The fire had burned down to a faint orange glow. Everything beyond that was black. I saw no shapes, no movement, no eyeshine. But the feeling didn't go away. I lay back down, wide awake until the sun started to come up. That morning, I packed up camp fast. I didn't care that I had more days planned. I didn't care that I hadn't seen a single animal or that nothing had obviously threatened me. I trusted my gut, and my gut was screaming to leave. I hiked out fast, following the same path along the stream. It was harder going downhill, legs sore, pack heavy again. But I kept moving. The whole time I felt like I was being watched, like eyes were on me from behind the trees. Once, I stopped and turned suddenly, nothing. But I knew it. I knew I wasn't alone out there. When I got to the truck, I threw everything into the bed and didn't even bother to change clothes. I drove straight out, bouncing hard on the gravel until I hit pavement. Only then did I feel my hands start to relax on the wheel. I didn't talk about it for a while. I didn't know how to explain it without sounding stupid. But later, I read some reports, old forums, scattered news stories. Turns out, people disappear out there. Not often, but every now and then. A hiker who never came back. A camper whose site was found trashed. Rangers chalk it up to exposure, animal attacks, accidents. And maybe they're right, but I think someone lives out there. Not an animal, not some wild man tale, just a person. Someone who doesn't want to be found. Someone who knows how to stay hidden. Maybe they're just surviving. Or maybe they don't like it when people come close. I think I camped too close to wherever they sleep. And I think they watched me all night, waiting to see if I'd leave. I'm never going back there. Not alone. Not ever. I decided to go camping that weekend to clear my head. I had some time off work, and I didn't feel like being around people. I didn't want bars, TV, traffic, or anything like that. I just wanted quiet. I needed to get away from things and not think too much. I picked a campground I'd never been to before, about 3 hours away. It was a state park in a forested area, and the online reviews said it was peaceful, with large sites spaced out well and not too crowded during the shoulder season. It wasn't deep wilderness, but it was quiet enough that I felt like I could breathe and be alone. I was going to stay for just one night. I left mid-afternoon and got there a little before sunset. The drive was nice, just long enough to feel like I was getting somewhere, but not so long that I was worn out by the time I arrived. The weather was good. It had rained a few days earlier, so the ground was soft and smelled like wet pine, but it wasn't muddy. The sky was mostly clear, and the wind had that cold edge that tells you fall is about to give way to winter. When I pulled into the campground, I noticed there were only a few other vehicles. I saw one car parked up near the entrance, a small green hatchback. Another was farther in, maybe 4 or 5 sites away from where I eventually set up. I picked a site near the back of the loop, mostly flat, with some trees between mine and the one where the other person was. I didn't want to be too close to anyone else. That was the whole point of being out there. I got out, stretched my legs, and started setting up camp. I had a small 2-person tent, a basic sleeping pad and bag, a camp stove, and a cooler with some food. I wasn't going fancy, just a quick overnight. I didn't bring a lantern, just my headlamp and a small flashlight. I didn't plan on staying up late. Once everything was set up, I walked around a bit to stretch out and get a feel for the area. The woods were quiet. No sounds except for the occasional bird or squirrel in the brush. No engines, no voices. It felt like I was far from everything, which was exactly what I wanted. I made a simple dinner, just heated a can of soup and ate it with some crackers. I sat at the picnic table, watched the sky darken, and tried not to think about anything. No emails, no stress, no plans. Just trees, a little wind, and the sound of my own chewing. When it got dark, I cleaned up, brushed my teeth, and got into the tent. I wasn't tired yet, but there wasn't much else to do. I lay down, turned off my light, and listened to the wind. I thought maybe I'd fall asleep quickly, but I didn't. I lay there for a while, just staring at the roof of the tent, trying to enjoy the silence. At some point, I drifted off. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but it was full dark outside, cold too. I stayed in my sleeping bag and listened for a while. The wind had died down, and the forest was still. No rustling, no footsteps, no distant howls. Just silence. Then I noticed a light flicker against the wall of my tent. It wasn't a fire or a flashlight moving around. It was a steady white glow, as if someone had pointed a floodlight in my direction. It wasn't lighting up the whole tent, just casting a sharp line of white along one edge. It was coming from the direction of the site next to mine. At first I thought it was nothing. Maybe the person at the other site had just turned on a lantern or something. But the light was bright, not just camping bright. It looked like someone had set up a full work light and pointed it at my tent. I didn't like how intense it was. It felt intentional. I sat up slowly and unzipped the side of my tent a couple inches to look out. My eyes took a second to adjust. The light hit me right in the face, and I had to shield my eyes with one hand. I couldn't see anything clearly at first, just the source of the light. A powerful beam coming from the other tent. It wasn't a lantern. It looked more like one of those square LED work lights you mount to the side of a building or use on a job site. It was too much for a campsite. Behind the light, I could barely make out the shape of a person sitting in front of their tent. They weren't moving. They were just sitting there, facing me with the light blinding me in the face. The whole thing hit me in a wave. I felt sick to my stomach. I didn't know what I was looking at or what this person wanted, but it didn't feel right. I'd been in quiet campgrounds before, but I'd never felt this before. This sharp, crawling tension in the back of my neck. I'd never been this sure, this fast, that something was wrong. I stepped out of my tent, heart pounding. As soon as I stood up, I shouted. I didn't even think about it. I yelled loud, not words, just raw sound. Something in me felt like yelling was the only thing I could do. The second I did, the person snapped back into their tent like they'd been pulled on a wire. They were gone in a second, just vanished behind the flap. But the light stayed on. That part's burned into my head. They went back in their tent, but the light kept shining right at me. I could feel it hitting my face. I was still half blinded, still staring straight into it. I stood there in the cold for what felt like forever, just breathing hard, not sure what to do next. I didn't move. I just kept watching the tent. I expected the light to go off or for the person to come back out, but nothing happened. Eventually, I forced myself to look away, back into my own tent. I grabbed my bag and my keys. My legs were shaking. I yelled again, trying to keep control of my voice. I didn't know what I was yelling for. Maybe just to let them know I wasn't frozen, that I wasn't going to stand there all night. Then I turned and ran to my car. The gravel crunched under my boots. The whole way I was waiting to hear footsteps behind me, but I didn't. I got to the car, unlocked it with shaking hands, and jumped inside. Slammed the door, turned the key, threw it in reverse. I didn't look back at the tent. I just drove. I didn't stop until I got to a gas station about 45 minutes away. It was one of those all-night places with fluorescent lights and a bathroom that smelled like bleach and old cigarettes. I sat in the car for a long time before going inside. I bought a bottle of water and a candy bar, then sat in the parking lot again, just breathing. It was around 4 in the morning when I started driving home. I didn't even think about sleeping until I pulled into my driveway after 7. I went inside, locked every door, and sat in the dark of my apartment for hours. Just sat there, trying to understand what happened. I didn't go back for my gear. I left everything there. Tent, sleeping bag, stove, cooler, everything. It wasn't worth it. For a while, I didn't tell anyone. Then I posted a short version of it online, just trying to put it into words. People asked why I didn't confront the guy, why I didn't stay and wait to see what he wanted, why I left. I don't know how to explain it in a way that makes sense if you weren't there. I saw someone sit down outside their tent in the middle of the night with a blinding light pointed right at me, not saying anything, not moving. And when I yelled, they didn't react like someone surprised or annoyed. They disappeared. The light didn't move. They just vanished inside, fast. It didn't feel like a mistake or a weird neighbor. It felt wrong in a way I've never felt before. I left because every part of me told me to, and I've never gone solo camping again. I don't go camping much anymore. I used to. I used to love it, actually. Getting away from everything for a night or two, no phone service, no one expecting you to answer emails or take calls. Just quiet, clean air, maybe a fire and a book. I always liked doing it solo. It was peaceful. I didn't have to plan anything for anyone else or listen to anyone else talk. It was just me, my gear, and the forest. That was enough. But one trip changed all that. This happened a little over a year ago. It was early fall, just starting to get chilly at night, but still nice during the day. I had a 3-day weekend coming up and decided to take a last-minute trip out to a state park I'd never been to before. It was a few hours' drive from where I live, out in a rural part of the state. Not backcountry or anything, just one of those simple campgrounds with numbered sites, fire rings, and a pit toilet in the middle of the loop. I looked it up online, and the reviews said it was usually quiet, good for solo campers or people passing through. I didn't think much of it. I packed up my stuff Friday morning, threw my cooler and camp gear in the back of my car, and hit the road. The weather was nice. Bright sky, a little wind, leaves just starting to turn. The drive was smooth, mostly 2-lane roads, some farms, small towns. I stopped for gas and a sandwich halfway there. By the time I pulled into the campground, it was a little after 5. The sun was low but still up, and there were only a few cars parked in the loop. I didn't see any rangers or attendants, just a self-check station with a board where you drop your money in an envelope and take a little tag to hang on your post. I liked that. It felt old school and quiet. I drove around the loop slowly, looking for a good site. There were maybe 3 or 4 other campers scattered through the campground. One family in a big tent near the front, someone with a truck and a rooftop tent farther down, and another car parked near the back of the loop. That last one was a dark gray sedan. Looked like an older model, maybe a Corolla or something. No roof box, no obvious gear on the outside. I picked a site about 3 spaces down from that sedan. There were trees between us, so I couldn't see who was there exactly, but I could see the top of a small green tent behind their car. It looked like a solo setup. Small footprint. No tarp, no camp chairs, no fire going. Just the tent and the car. It didn't seem like anyone was walking around. I parked, stretched my legs, and started setting up. My site was decent, flat ground, a picnic table, some pine trees behind me, and a short path that led to the outhouse at the center of the loop. I set up my tent and pad, rolled out my sleeping bag, and laid my flashlight and headlamp on top of my duffel. Then I set up my small stove on the table and started heating some canned chili. It was a nice evening. A few birds chirping, the wind picking up now and then through the trees, the smell of dry leaves and smoke from the family's fire down the loop. It felt like what I came for. Calm, simple, just being outside and off the clock. I ate my food slowly, watching the shadows stretch across the ground. I noticed the other campers barely made any noise. I couldn't hear anything from the green tent near me. No fire crackling, no talking, no cooking sounds, just stillness. I figured maybe they were already inside, reading or something. It got dark quickly after dinner. I cleaned my pan, packed away the food, and took a walk to the outhouse before calling it a night. On the way back, I passed closer to the site with the green tent. I didn't mean to get close, but the way the path curved brought me maybe 20 feet from the tent. It was lit from the inside with a very bright white light, like a lantern or a high-powered headlamp hung from the top. I slowed for a second. The light was too bright to see anything inside, but I could tell someone was sitting up in there. The silhouette was still, just sitting cross-legged, facing the door, not moving. It was weird, not creepy, not yet, just strange. Most people lie down when they're in their tent at night, or move around organizing stuff, reading something, but this person was just sitting still. I walked back to my site, zipped up my tent, and climbed into my sleeping bag. I read on my Kindle for a while, then turned off my light and lay there. It was completely quiet. I didn't hear music or talking or even movement from any of the other sites. I was just starting to doze off when I noticed light hitting the side of my tent. It was steady, bright, and white, not flickering like a fire, not moving like a flashlight, just solid. It hit from one direction like a beam aimed right at me. I opened my eyes and stared at the wall of my tent. I could see my own shadow against it, sharp and clear. I didn't want to believe it, but I already knew where it was coming from. That green tent. I sat up slowly, trying to breathe evenly. I unzipped the flap just a few inches and looked out. Sure enough, there it was, that person's tent, lit up like a stage, and that same beam of bright white light pointed straight at mine. Not moving. It wasn't just lighting up the area. It was aimed directly at my tent. Deliberate. And then I saw him. He was outside his tent now, sitting in front of it on the ground, legs crossed, still, just sitting, not doing anything, not moving. The light sat behind him, aimed at me. I couldn't see his face clearly, but he was definitely looking straight at my tent. Something in my chest flipped over. I didn't move. I didn't want to let him know I was awake. I just watched, for maybe 30 seconds. He didn't look away, didn't fidget, didn't stand. He just sat there like a statue, staring, with that insane light burning into my campsite. I couldn't think clearly. My stomach turned. My fingers felt numb. I closed the flap and sat back, trying to slow my breathing. This wasn't right. People don't do that. People don't sit like that in the dark, pointing lights at strangers and staring. I thought maybe if I ignored it, it would stop. I thought maybe he didn't mean anything by it. But that idea fell apart the longer I sat there. 10 minutes passed. 15. The light didn't move. It was still hitting the same exact spot on my tent, like it was fixed in place. And he didn't move either. That's when I decided to leave. I didn't care if it was overreacting. Something about his posture, the way he aimed the light, how silent he was. It all screamed bad intent. I got out of my tent, heart pounding, and shouted. Not words, just a shout, pure alarm, loud, raw from the chest. As soon as I did, he jumped. I saw him move, fast, jerky, scrambling back into his tent. It wasn't startled confusion. It was panicked retreat, like he'd been caught doing something. But the light stayed on. That detail still messes with me. He was back inside in seconds, but the light, still aimed at me, kept shining like nothing had changed. That meant it wasn't in his hand. He had it set up on something, pointed directly at me, and planned to sit there with it burning into my sight while he watched. That's when I knew for sure. I didn't wait for him to come back out. I didn't grab anything except my car keys, my phone, and the bag with my wallet. I yelled again, short, loud, and then ran straight for my car. I didn't look back. I jumped in, locked the doors, turned the engine, and backed out fast. My headlights swept across the trees and empty fire rings as I made the loop. Then I was back on the road, tires popping gravel and leaves. I drove for over an hour without stopping. Didn't cry, didn't scream, just sat there frozen, hands tight on the wheel, checking the mirror every few seconds like a maniac. I pulled into a gas station near a small town and parked under the lights. I stayed there a long time, engine off, doors locked. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grab my water bottle. Eventually, I drove home. I got back just after sunrise. I didn't even unpack. I went inside, locked all the doors, and sat on the couch staring at the floor. That guy, whoever he was, wasn't camping. Not really. He wasn't cooking, wasn't walking around, didn't have gear out. He didn't act like someone relaxing in the woods. He acted like someone waiting, watching. His setup, his silence, the way he ran when I yelled. It all made sense later. He was a creep, predator, maybe. At best, he was someone with bad intentions. At worst, I don't even want to think about it. I left because something deep in my gut told me to leave. I didn't need a reason. I didn't need proof. The way he moved, the way he watched, it was enough. And the worst part? He never turned off the light. Even as I drove away, that blinding white beam stayed on, fixed in place, still burning across the dark campground. I think he wanted me to see him, and I think if I'd stayed quiet, if I'd waited or fallen asleep, he would have come closer. That was the last time I ever camped alone. I always liked the idea of getting away, that old fantasy of disappearing into nature, away from screens, away from the noise, away from the mess. It's the same thing everyone talks about. Peace, clarity, fresh air. I was never someone who went camping much as a kid, but I picked it up later in life. And once I did, I found out how much it helped me reset. Even if it was just for a weekend, it made things feel clearer. It was a Friday in early fall when I decided to head out solo. Work had been grinding me down, and I felt like I was just existing on autopilot. I told a couple of people I'd be gone for the weekend, packed up the gear, and drove a few hours out to a semi-remote campground in the mountains. It wasn't totally off-grid. There were a few campsites along the lake, some fire rings, even a pit toilet if you were willing to hike 5 minutes. But it wasn't busy. That's what I wanted, quiet. When I arrived that afternoon, I only saw one other car in the lot. The sun was starting to lower, casting a soft orange hue on the leaves. I walked down the gravel trail with my gear, took my time picking a good site near the water. I could see across the lake from where I pitched the tent. Nobody on the other side, nobody close by. I set up, got the fire started, cooked some food, and let the stress of the city slip off my shoulders. It was the kind of evening that makes you forget the crap waiting back home. By the time it got dark, it was completely silent. No traffic, no voices, just the rustling of trees and the occasional fish breaking the surface of the lake. I sat by the fire until the logs were just glowing embers, then zipped myself into my tent and fell asleep fast. Sometime in the early morning hours, maybe 3 or 4 a.m., I woke up. First, I didn't know why. Everything was still. Then I heard it, crunching, footsteps in the leaves. Not an animal. I've heard animals plenty of times on other trips, deer, raccoons, even a bear once. This was different. Slow, deliberate steps, then a pause, then more steps. I held my breath. My tent fabric might as well have been paper. I was completely exposed. The sound was coming from up the trail, maybe 30 or 40 feet away, behind some bushes. Whoever it was, they weren't talking. No light, just walking. I kept still. My heart was thudding in my ears. After a minute, the footsteps stopped. Then I heard nothing. I stayed frozen in my sleeping bag for over an hour, barely blinking. My knife was in my boot near the tent door, but I didn't dare move. Eventually, the morning light began to seep in, and the sounds of birds started up again. When I finally crawled out of the tent, everything looked normal. No one around. I walked up the trail, scanned the area. No one. But I noticed some marks in the dirt near the bushes. Not deep tracks, but enough to make it clear that someone had stood there. That shook me up, but I talked myself down. Maybe it was another camper checking out the lake. Maybe they got turned around in the dark. It was odd, but not impossible. I cooked some oatmeal, packed my day pack, and decided to hike up one of the ridges. I figured some movement would clear my head. The trail was quiet all day. I didn't see another soul. That was comforting and unsettling at the same time. I got back to camp in the late afternoon, sweaty and tired. I took a quick swim in the lake to cool off. The water was cold, but clean. For a few hours, I forgot about the night before. I watched the sun go down from the edge of the water, then went through the routine again. Fire, food, settle in. That second night, I didn't sleep much. Every small sound outside the tent put me on edge. Twigs snapping, leaves rustling. I kept my flashlight and knife close. I probably only drifted off a few times for 20 minutes at a time. But by dawn, nothing had happened. I got up early, groggy, and tried to talk myself into staying one more night. The trip was supposed to help me decompress, but something just didn't feel right. Couldn't shake it. Still, I convinced myself to stay. I spent that third day close to the campsite, reading, writing in a notebook, drinking instant coffee. It was cloudy that day, and the air was cooler. It felt heavier. I didn't like it. Around 6 p.m., I heard another person for the first time since I arrived. Footsteps and the sound of someone talking faintly to themselves. I turned and saw a man walking up the trail from the direction of the parking area. He looked to be in his 40s, maybe older, wearing dark clothes, a big backpack. He didn't make eye contact with me, just kept walking until he was at the site farthest from mine, about 150 feet up the path. I kept watching until he was out of view. I tried to brush it off, but my stomach turned. Something about the way he moved didn't sit right. He didn't look around like he was admiring the place, didn't stretch or rest after the hike in. He just walked straight to the site like he'd been here before. That night, it was dark early. Cloud cover, no stars. I didn't make a fire. I sat in my tent for a while, trying to read with a headlamp, but couldn't focus. At some point, I heard movement from his direction. Then nothing. Then a light. Not a normal camping lantern glow. This was bright, uncomfortably bright, and it was aimed right at my tent. My heart dropped. I sat still, staring at the light bleeding through the fabric. After a few seconds, I unzipped the tent, stepped out, and yelled loud. I wasn't even thinking, just reacting. As soon as I made noise, the man jumped, literally jumped back, and darted into his tent like I'd caught him doing something. Then nothing. Just silence and that glaring light aimed at me, like some kind of warning. I stood there, frozen. My hands were shaking. I waited a minute, two. Then I yelled again, louder this time. He didn't come out, didn't say anything, didn't move. I backed toward my tent, grabbed my keys and light, and ran. I didn't pack anything. I didn't turn around. I sprinted through the woods with my headlamp bouncing, heart racing, lungs burning. When I got to the lot, it was pitch black. My car was the only one there. I got in, locked the doors, and sat for a second trying to catch my breath. Then I started it and drove. I didn't stop until I hit the first gas station an hour down the road. I parked and just sat there for a long time. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even check into a motel. I just drove and drove until I got home. Once I was there, I didn't tell anyone right away. I didn't even know what I'd say. I felt stupid for going alone. I felt ashamed for being afraid. But the more I thought about it, the more clear it became. His reaction, his behavior, it wasn't normal. He wasn't surprised by me being there. He was startled I caught him doing something. And the fact that he just sat in his tent with that bright light aimed at mine, that wasn't random. That wasn't some harmless camper with weird habits. He was watching, and I interrupted him. I thought about going to the Rangers, but I didn't have a name. I didn't have a license plate, no real evidence. Just a gut feeling that if I'd waited a little longer, if I'd hesitated at all, something much worse could have happened. I don't think I was the first person he's done that to. I think he's been there before, probably often, waiting, hoping for someone like me to come alone. I still have the gear. I never threw it out, but it took me over a year to even consider camping again. And even now, I never go alone. I never camp without cell service. I never pick remote spots, no matter how pretty they look in pictures. I always keep my car within sight. Always let someone know exactly where I am. Because the scariest part wasn't him being out there. It was realizing how long he might have been watching before I even knew it, and how close I came to becoming someone else's headline. I've always liked being outside. I guess that comes from growing up in the kind of place where we didn't have much else. I was raised in a rural county with one gas station and more cows than people. I grew up hunting, fishing, hiking, and learning how to take care of myself out there. I'm a big guy, 6'3", well over 200 pounds. People tend to leave me alone, and I like it that way. As I got older, camping became my reset. I work construction now, and most days I come home with my hands sore and my back tight. So when I get a few days off, I grab my gear and head out into the woods. Not into the campgrounds with picnic tables and RVs, real woods. Dispersed camping. BLM land or Forest Service areas where you don't see anyone for days. No traffic, no rules, just you and the trees. It's what I live for. But the older I get, the more I've realized something that never really hit me before. I'm not afraid of bears. I'm not afraid of snakes. I'm not afraid of getting lost. The thing that puts the weight in my gut now is people. Not all people, just the kind you meet too far from the trailheads, the kind that don't belong. When I was younger, I thought carrying a firearm was overkill. Now, I don't go anywhere without one. I'm a legal carrier, always a sidearm at minimum. I don't care if I'm 3 miles out or 30. You don't get second chances out there. A few years ago, I learned why I've always had that gut feeling. It was early fall. I'd been working 6-day weeks for months and finally got a long weekend. I live in northern Arizona, so I pointed my truck toward the Mogollon Rim. Big, high country pines, cool air, not a soul in sight. There's a turnoff I know past a small forest road. Nothing marked, no signs, no trailhead. Just a few worn tire tracks through the trees that fade into nothing. You go far enough, you can't even hear planes. That's what I wanted. I left Friday morning. Stopped in Payson for gas and supplies. Picked up some beef jerky, canned food, water, propane for my stove, a new tarp since the old one had holes. The truck was packed with everything I needed: tent, cot, shovel, pistol, a couple extra mags. No plans, no cell service, just open forest. That was the goal. The drive was smooth, cool breeze, blue sky. When I finally turned off onto that forest road, I rolled down the windows, smelled the pine, heard the crunch of gravel under the tires. It already felt like home. I kept driving for another 20 or 30 minutes until the tracks got faint. Then I pulled off into a small clearing barely wider than my truck. No signs anyone had been there in a long time. Perfect. I parked, checked my surroundings, then started setting up camp. Tent went up fast. I tied the new tarp between 2 trees for shade and rain cover, then unrolled my sleeping bag and locked the truck. The spot was nestled between tall trees with some brush around the edges, thick enough to block line of sight from anyone driving past. I built a fire ring out of stones, collected deadwood, stacked it up. The sun was still a couple hours from setting. I cracked open a can of stew and heated it over the flames, listening to the wind move through the branches. It was exactly what I needed. That first night, I slept fine. The woods were alive, but in that normal way: crickets, distant owls, the occasional breeze making a branch creak. I slept with the pistol in my sleeping bag, just like I always do. Never needed it. Didn't expect to. Woke up the next morning early, stretched out the stiffness, boiled water for coffee, sat on a stump, and watched the light break over the treetops. I spent the day walking the woods, not really following a path, just moving slow, checking out the terrain. I found an old fire ring probably used by hunters a few seasons ago. I marked it mentally and kept going. Saw some elk tracks, found a dry creek bed, took some pictures of twisted tree roots. By the time I got back to camp, the sun was low again. I ate jerky and peanuts for dinner, then just sat there with the fire and let the peace soak in. But sometime around midnight, I woke up. At first, I didn't know why. I lay still, listening. The fire had gone out, but I always let it die before I sleep. I didn't hear animals. No wind, no rain, just stillness. But I had that feeling in my chest, like being watched. It's not something you can explain unless you've felt it. Your skin tightens, your heartbeat changes, your brain kicks into gear before your body does. I stayed there, eyes open, hand already on the pistol under the sleeping bag. Then I heard it, a footstep, not a squirrel, not a branch falling, a solid, deliberate step on dry pine needles just outside the tent. Then another. Whoever it was walking slow, not circling, not rushing, just taking a few steps, then stopping, like they were listening. I didn't move. I didn't unzip the tent. I just waited. Maybe 30 seconds passed. Then the steps moved again, this time closer. I could tell they were just a few feet from the side of the tent now. Still no flashlight, no voice, no sound of gear, just boots on dirt. I stayed frozen for what felt like forever. Then, without warning, the sound stopped. Nothing. I held my breath for a minute, then 2, then 5. Finally, I slid the zipper down just enough to peek out. I saw nothing. Black trees, faint moonlight, no movement. I slid out, pistol ready, and swept the area slowly. Circled the camp. Nothing out of place. No sign anyone had been there. But I know what I heard. The next morning, I didn't pack up. I thought about it, but I told myself maybe it was an animal after all. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. I checked the area again. No tracks, no trash, no signs of another person. Still, I wore the pistol on my hip all day, even while cooking. I didn't leave camp again. Just stayed close. Collected more firewood. Read from a book. Kept alert. That evening, right before sunset, I spotted something. Up on the ridge behind my camp, about 60 yards away, I saw a glint, just for a second, like the sun hitting glass or metal. I stared hard, but couldn't make anything out. I stood up, walked toward it quietly, trying to keep the crunch of leaves soft under my boots. When I got about halfway there, I stopped. There was no sound, no birds. The woods had gone still again. I waited, watched the trees. Then I turned and walked back to camp, not showing that I noticed. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the fire with my back to a tree and my gun in my hand, watching the shadows. I never saw anything, but that feeling didn't leave. By morning, I was exhausted. I stood up, stretched, packed a few things, and debated leaving. But something in me didn't want to get run out. It was my weekend. I was on public land. I hadn't done anything wrong. So I made the choice to stay one more night. That was the mistake. Around noon, I walked down to a small clearing about 200 yards from my site. There was a fallen log there that I used as a rest bench. When I got there, I saw something that made my stomach drop. A cigarette butt, still fresh. Someone had been sitting there, and I don't smoke. I scanned the trees. No movement, no sound. But I knew right then that someone had been watching. Probably the night before, maybe earlier, and I'd never even heard them. That kind of silence doesn't come by accident. I moved fast, went back to camp, packed everything in a hurry. Didn't fold, didn't clean, just crammed gear into bins and bags and tossed it into the truck bed. I threw dirt over the fire ring, kicked leaves over the spot where the tent had been, and checked the truck cab twice to make sure everything was in place. Then I got in, started the engine, and drove. I didn't go back the way I came. I took a different forest road that looped north, then west, thinking I'd avoid whoever had been out there. I didn't relax until I hit pavement an hour later. Still didn't see another car. When I finally got home late that night, I unpacked everything and sat on the porch with a beer, trying to shake it off. But the feeling didn't go away. The next morning, I took everything out of the truck and checked for signs of tampering. Found none. But when I opened my camping bin, I noticed one thing was missing, my folding saw. Just gone. I know I packed it. I'd used it to cut limbs for firewood the first night. And now it was gone. That's not something you misplace. It doesn't just fall out. Someone took it. I'll never know what their plan was. Maybe they were just watching. Maybe they were hoping I'd leave camp for longer. Maybe they were waiting for night. I don't know. But I know one thing for certain. They weren't out there hiking. They weren't hunting. They weren't lost. They were watching me. Since then, I still camp, still go out into the woods, but I never use the same sites twice. I never leave anything unattended. I carry more gear now, more ammo, more tools, cameras that run on motion sensors. I've built a kind of system. I set up trip lines with small bells. I keep extra batteries for the flashlights. I started solo camping in my late 20s. It was a quiet escape from everything, the traffic, the news, the obligations that come with even the simplest social interactions. When you hike far enough in, you can actually hear your own heartbeat. I found peace out there. Just me, the trees, the sounds of nature. But after what happened a couple years ago, that peace changed. Now, I always take my 30 to 30 lever action with me. Not because of bears or coyotes. I've had a few run-ins with wildlife, sure, but because of people. This story happened in late September 2 years ago. I remember the time clearly because the leaves had just started to change in the northern part of the state. I'd driven out to a national forest I'd visited a few times before. It wasn't a campground. This was dispersed camping territory. You find your own site, set up wherever the forest allows, and leave no trace. That's the kind of camping I like. No crowds, no noise, just the rustling of trees and the distant chirp of birds. I parked my car at a turnout along an old logging road and hiked in about 2.5 miles. My pack was heavy, but I was used to it: tent, sleeping gear, stove, food, water filter, the essentials. Plus, the rifle. I never used to bring it, but after that one night years back, I didn't feel right without it. It stayed strapped to the side of my pack or beside me when I slept. I set up my tent near a bend in a stream. It wasn't a marked trail, which I liked. The brush was a little thicker, and you had to be familiar with reading the terrain to know how to move around. I picked a flat, mossy spot about 20 yards from the water, where the ground was dry but soft enough for the stakes. I cooked a simple dinner that night: freeze-dried chili and a handful of trail mix. After I ate, I hung my bear bag, stoked a small fire, and watched the sky turn from blue to purple to black. That first night passed uneventfully. I woke a few times to the normal sounds: twigs snapping, something rustling leaves, maybe a small animal nosing through the underbrush. It didn't bother me. My rifle was beside me, the safety on. I drifted off each time without much concern. The second day, I hiked further east, explored a ridgeline, and saw some animal tracks near a muddy patch of ground. Coyote, I thought. Nothing big. I moved through the trees, bushwhacking a bit, then looped back toward camp in the afternoon. I kept everything tidy around my tent. No trash, no food, just a fire ring I used at night and a flat log I sat on when I ate. Everything else stayed packed away or in the bear bag up in the tree. It wasn't until the third night that something felt off. Not terrifying at first, just off. I went to sleep around 9. The fire had burned down to glowing coals, and I had the rifle next to me inside the tent. I always unzipped the front a little to let in fresh air. It was cold enough that I kept my hat on in the sleeping bag. I listened to the wind in the trees, the occasional crack of a branch. Normal forest sounds. Then I heard something heavier than normal. Not an animal. A steady crunch. Pause. Crunch. Crunch. Like footsteps, but slower. More cautious. They were faint, far off at first, but they got closer. I lifted my head and held my breath. The steps stopped. I waited, heart pounding. Then I heard them again. Closer now. Deliberate. I reached for the rifle and clicked the safety off, keeping my finger away from the trigger. My other hand stayed near the zipper. I didn't move, just listened. Then nothing. Dead quiet. No wind. No animals. Just silence. That's what unsettled me most. The woods are never completely silent. Even at night, there's always some movement. But this? It was like everything around me was holding its breath. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I just laid there, rifle across my chest, eyes on the dim outline of the tent wall. By morning, the feeling had passed. Maybe it had been an animal. Maybe my mind was messing with me. But I didn't believe that, not fully. I got up, stepped out, and did a slow circle around the area. No footprints, not that I could see. The forest floor was covered in leaves and pine needles. easy to walk over without leaving much trace. Still, I looked, checked the trail to the stream. Nothing. I decided to stay one more night. Part of me didn't want to give in to fear. That's how you lose the parts of life you love. But I kept my rifle closer that day. Didn't stray far from camp. That evening, I built the fire earlier than usual. Made dinner while there was still some light. A few clouds rolled in, dark and thick. Looked like rain, but it never came. Just a heavy sky and damp air. I sat by the fire longer than normal, watching the trees. I thought about packing up early in the morning and heading back to the car before sunrise. That idea stuck with me. I didn't like it, but it seemed smart. Then, just after I zipped into my tent for the night, I heard it again. That same sound. Crunch, crunch, pause, then again. Closer this time. I sat up fast, hands tight on the rifle. The footsteps circled, slow, deliberate. They weren't right by the tent, not at first. Just moving around like someone checking the area. I stayed still, not breathing. Then one loud snap of a twig. Close. I had the rifle up now, safety off. Still didn't unzip the tent. I didn't want to reveal anything about where I was pointing it. I aimed at the direction of the sound, hand shaking. The steps stopped. Then I heard something else. Breathing. Not an animal. Slow. Controlled. I stayed like that for what felt like an hour, though I know it was probably just 10 or 15 minutes. Eventually, the sounds stopped. No more steps. No breathing. Just quiet. I didn't sleep. I waited until first light. The second I saw color returning to the sky, I packed everything. Tent down. Bag loaded. I didn't eat. Didn't make coffee. I moved fast. I didn't take the main path back. I bushwhacked straight northwest, used the sun and my compass. I didn't want to walk out the same way I came in. Didn't want to give anyone the chance to follow. The hike took longer, but I didn't stop. Not once. Not even for water. I sipped from my bottle while walking. I reached the logging road around noon. Scratched up, sweating, and sore. My car was untouched. I loaded my gear and left. Didn't look back. Back home, I replayed the whole trip over and over. What if I had unzipped the tent? What if I'd called out? Would they have run? Would it have escalated? I don't know. I don't think I want to know. Now, when I camp alone, I'm even more careful. I pick more remote spots. I never stay more than 2 nights. I don't light a fire unless I need to cook. I keep my car key in my boot and my rifle loaded, safety on, always within reach. That trip changed how I see the woods. I still love the quiet, the peace of being out there. But I know I'm not alone. It's not the animals that make me nervous. It's the people who walk through the trees at night, slowly, quietly, like they're looking for something, or someone. I've always loved the quiet. That's one of the reasons I camp alone so often. It's not that I hate people. I just like my time better when I can hear the trees and the wind instead of conversations and car stereos. It helps me think, helps me reset. I don't go to campsites with benches and trash cans. I prefer the dispersed spots, a few miles down rough dirt roads where you might not see anyone else for days. The trip I'm about to tell you about started like any other. It was early fall, and the leaves were just starting to dry out. I packed light because I planned on staying only 2 nights. Just me, my pack, my small tent, and my 30-30 lever action, which I never used for anything but peace of mind. Some folks say that's excessive, but I've run into enough wild animals and 1 or 2 people who made the hair stand up on my arms. It's not paranoia when it's happened before. That trip, I had this idea in my head to do something new. I'd found a weird pair of hiking boots at a thrift store the week before. They were worn, really broken in, but not trashed. They had this old leather smell and the kind of wear that meant someone had put miles on them. I thought it'd be interesting to wear them for this trip, kind of a challenge to myself. Breaking in new boots can be a pain, but something about these ones felt like they'd already molded to me. I parked off a Forest Service road I'd found last year. The map showed a creek about a mile in, and I remembered a flat patch of land that'd be perfect for a tent. No one else was around, which wasn't unusual. I hiked in and set up before sunset. The spot was just as I'd remembered, quiet, flat, and out of sight of the road. It was peaceful. That first night, I cooked a small meal, cleaned up, then sat with a headlamp and a paperback until I was tired. No cell service, but I told a friend where I was going and when I'd be back. It was normal routine. I crawled into my tent, slid into the sleeping bag, and listened to the sounds of the woods until I dozed off. I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of sticks crunching. That sound carries in the woods. I've heard deer and coyotes at night before, but this was slower, more deliberate. 1 or 2 steps, then a pause. My heart started to pound. I held my breath to listen better. Another step, then nothing. I stayed still for a long time. Eventually, I figured it was just an animal being curious. But I did sit up, unzipped the tent, and looked out. I couldn't see anything, but I made a point to swing my headlamp around slowly. After a full circle, I zipped the tent back up, grabbed my rifle, and laid it next to me. Morning came and the area around my camp looked undisturbed. No tracks, no sign of anything. I figured I'd just let my imagination get the better of me. After breakfast, I hiked a short trail I'd marked, made a few notes in my journal, then came back before dusk. I always try to stay in camp as night falls. It makes things easier to manage if you're already settled in. That night felt different. It was colder and the wind had picked up. I sat by the fire longer than usual, adding small branches and watching the flames. The boots I'd worn from the thrift store sat by the tent entrance. I'd brought sandals for camp, but something about looking at those boots made me uneasy. They were just boots, but they looked like they held stories I didn't want to know. I eventually turned in, zipped up, and tried to sleep. Again, I woke up to the sound of movement. This time, it was closer. No doubt about it. Slow, deliberate steps. Something was just outside my tent. I could hear the breathing. Low, steady. I sat up quickly and grabbed my rifle. I didn't yell. I didn't want to. I needed to know more before I gave away that I was awake. I leaned over and slowly unzipped the tent door just enough to peek through. What I saw froze me in place. There was a man standing near the tree line. He wasn't looking at the tent. Not directly, but he was facing it, body angled toward me. He stood there with his arms at his sides, and his clothes looked worn. Dirty jeans, heavy jacket, and something slung across his back. Couldn't tell what. His face was mostly hidden by the shadow. Then he moved. Quickly. He turned and walked. Moved. Fast, almost darting behind the trees. I lost sight of him immediately. I backed away, heart slamming, and zipped the tent shut. I turned off the light and waited in the dark. I didn't know if he was coming back, or if he'd left, but I didn't sleep again. To first light, I packed everything fast. I kept my rifle out the whole time. I didn't even bother cooking breakfast. I shoved the thrift shop boots into the bottom of my pack and hiked back to the car in less than half the time it had taken to come in. When I got to the car, I threw everything into the back, started the engine, and drove without stopping for 20 minutes. I only let myself breathe once I got back to paved road. I didn't tell anyone right away. I didn't want to sound paranoid, but I kept thinking about that man. The way he stood, how quiet he had been. It didn't feel like some random hiker or hunter. It felt planned, like he'd been watching me. A few days later, I checked the news and saw nothing about the area. No missing persons, no crime reports. It was like it never happened, but I couldn't let it go. I pulled out the boots from the pack, looked at them. They were different now. I noticed, on the inside lining of the left boot, tiny initials carved into the leather. They weren't mine. I never noticed them before. I don't know if they were there when I bought them, but they made the boots feel even more wrong. I burned them. I don't know if they were connected to what happened. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe I just scared myself. But I haven't gone camping alone since. I still love the quiet. I still miss the woods. But I don't trust what might be out there anymore. It's not the animals I worry about. Not the weather. Not the getting lost. It's the people. The ones who hide in the dark. The ones who don't say anything. The ones who wait. And now, even when I camp with others, I keep my rifle close. I check every corner of the site. I sleep light, because out there, when it's just you and the trees, no one's coming to help if someone decides to do something. and some people already have.